So I'm going to read all of your comment here and then address all of this. Because some of it you're right about and some of it you're not. So, and I think, and let me just say it from the onset, I'm not a Christian nationalist. We allow all different religions, but we're talking about the settlers here, and not enough is considered with the settlers, and I think it's deliberately been that way. And I'll say that, I'll explain in a minute. So you said you're right that access to the Bible in English changed everything, and it was a huge shift when people could read scripture for themselves instead of relying solely on Latin Mass. That was a major part of the Reformation, and it did lead to people feeling empowered to challenge the church hierarchy. But here's what's often missing from that story. The Church of England broke away from the Catholic Church under Henry VIII, not over theology, but because the Pope wouldn't grant him a divorce. True, but the Church of England still kept on the practices that the Catholics were using. So yeah, they broke away from the Vatican, but kept the same practices. That's what people had issue with. So it wasn't just about spiritual freedom. It was about power. And yes, many of the English separatists, including Puritans and Pilgrims, believed they were God's chosen people like the Israelites. But that mindset led them to believe they were justified in building a theocracy and violently excluding anyone who didn't believe as they did. Okay, they weren't violent. That's part of the lie. Did they discriminate? They did. They were not happy at all when they saw the Catholics coming over, because the Protestants kept telling the Catholics, and I can't disagree with it, okay? Like Catholics admitted they were using pagan practices. They were because everybody was practicing paganism before Christ's word came through. In order to implement Catholicism, Rome did it slowly and let them keep some of their idols. That's the issue the Protestants had, is that they never actually had them get, and much of these practices they kept that were pagan practices, they kept on, so that didn't sit with them. Look, whatever people want to say, I've heard my whole life people rip on these people. I have. And I think it's deliberately done so. No offense to you, okay, if you're liberal. But I think it's done by the liberals, because the majority of liberals are not, they seem to hate Christians, okay? They seem to hate Christianity. They fear it for some reason, don't know why. But here's the thing, these were thousands of people. The Puritans, the Pilgrims, coming in different waves. And here's the other thing. Even though, yes, you are correct, Henry VIII broke off from the Catholic Church, they still kept they were still doing the same practices. And by the time the Pilgrims and all of them started coming here, Henry VIII wasn't even in anymore. It was King James I. And King James I, so that was it was when by the time all of these people, the settlers came here, it was 70 years after Henry VIII. And yes, at least for the Pilgrims, they did go to Holland, the Netherlands first. They did go, and they didn't feel that they really fit in there. And they felt led. I mean, these were different sects of people. They weren't just all one big group. Like the Pilgrims came, then, there were different waves of Puritans from different areas in England. And yet all of them felt like they were being led here by God to the New World. Who are you to say that's not true? Of course this world wants to say that. But if you look at the Old Testament, you could say the same thing to Moses and the Israelites. I mean, that's the argument anybody can make. Yet God's gone on to raise this country up, and we're only 250 years old. How did a country that's one of the youngest countries on the planet, okay, we've only been around 250 years, how did we become a superpower, huh? We're not that big of a country when you put us next to some of these other ones, India, Russia. Because of God, because these people, these Puritans, Pilgrims, they came here, they made covenants, they believed. It's like I've said this before, they were the modern, they were the mature version of the Israelites. When you read into their voyage here and all the craziness that went on, like on the Mayflower, and how their whole, ship went off course. I mean, they were willing to come here as indentured servants. That's really what they were coming for, the Pilgrims anyway, was they were going to go into indentured servitude for 7 years. Because back then, people followed the Bible more. So the Bible talks about after 7 years, you have to let your slaves go. They were going to be indentured servitude. They were supposed to go to Pennsylvania, but their boat went off course, and their boat couldn't get fixed, couldn't go any further, so they had to settle in Plymouth. And the moment they stepped foot on that rock, they made covenants, but it wasn't just them, it was other ones. Then you look at people like William Penn, who went on to name Philadelphia after the church in Asia Minor in the book of Revelations. But it wasn't just him, it was all of these settlers. They named different cities in this country after those churches that are mentioned in Revelations. So that's how much these people believed. And then hateful people come along and want to write them off as violent. They themselves were never violent. Yes, did some of the Pennsylvania Puritans, they have issue with the Indians? Yes, because the Indians were attacking them. Like, it's always this whole, it's the indigenous people crap, okay? But it's like, there were deals made, there were treaties made, it's gone on in every country. People can make all the excuses they want. It's America now, okay? So the Puritans, however, or the Pilgrims, however, there were many of these people that made it work with the Native Americans. They helped them, and they helped, but nobody wants to ever look at that. But the thing is, nobody ever wants to look at how they believed they were being led by God. How could those thousands of people, not all coming in one group either, not even all knowing each other, yet coming in different ways at different times, yet they all believed they were coming here because they were being led by God. And you want to write that off as a coincidence? That's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. I can understand to a certain extent they were not violent towards other faiths. Did they discriminate? They did. They didn't want the pagan practices coming here. If you can try to look at it from their angle. Am I saying it's right? No, but they were also struggling. Here's my thing. Given that the Catholics were told over and over again to get rid of the Catholic practices, and they wouldn't, and so then all these Protestants come here. Okay, because they didn't want to be doing that anymore. They saw it as wrong in God's eyes, okay? So they come here, they make this harsh journey here, okay? And they believe they're being led by God. In my opinion, they are, because God wanted to move them. God wanted to use this land for bigger things, clearly. And then, so they believed that they were being led by God. They saw themselves as the modern Israelites. And yet, so then when the Catholics start coming here, to me it would have been obvious, like, what are you doing? You have things the way you want over there, so why are you coming here? Nothing against Catholics. I was born and raised Catholic, but there's a lot of problems with it. Okay? There is. So I can kind of understand that. I would take that as a threat, but they were never violent with them. They just wanted to make sure they weren't going to come in and do the same bullshit that was going on in England. That's what their fear was. Was it always handled right back then because of the way they set up law? No, it wasn't. But again, it's like none of us do anything perfect. But then you go on to talk about, they created a theocracy. Well, you never look at it from their angle. You said, so while reading the Bible for yourself was revolutionary, it didn't automatically lead to liberty for all. It often led to new forms of control. Well, yeah, God himself in the Old Testament was really kind of a controlling God, but that was because they were immature in their faith. But they're human beings. They did the best they could. So for me, I tried to look at it from both sides and not just one side. Because this country has forever wanted to rip all over the settlers. And I think it's ridiculous to discount that those thousands of people that didn't all know each other, didn't all come at the same time, all believed they were being led by God, and that's just a coincidence. Please.